I'd faced down hostile foreign dignitaries, but nothing prepared me for the moment my suburban neighbor, raging over a muddy paw print, pulled a Glock 19 and pointed it squarely at my chest. The smell of freshly cut grass and damp earth has always been my reset button. After a week of navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the Pentagon, where every conversation is layered with subtext and every decision carries the weight of national security, my garden is my sanctuary. It's the one place where the only strategy I need is figuring out how to keep the squirrels away from my heirloom tomatoes. On this particular Saturday morning, the sun was warm, my coffee was hot, and my golden retriever, Winston, was contentedly chasing butterflies near the hedge that separated my property from my new neighbor's. It was, by all accounts, a perfect morning. My new neighbor, a man I'd only met in passing, was Officer Miller. He had moved in 2 months ago, and his presence was noticeable. His lawn was a chemically treated, unnaturally green carpet. His truck, always parked perfectly parallel to the curb, was so polished you could see your reflection in the hubcaps. He was a man who clearly liked order and control. We'd had a few brief, sterile interactions. He'd once left a neatly printed note on my door about my recycling bin being left out 3 hours past the designated pickup time. I'd seen him measuring the height of his grass with a ruler. He was, to put it mildly, wild a little tight. I figured he was just a stickler for HOA rules and left it at that. Lord knows I deal with bigger problems than lawn maintenance from Monday to Friday. I was on my knees wrestling with a particularly stubborn patch of weeds when I heard the shouting. It wasn't just a raised voice, it was a parade ground bellow full of fury and indignation. "Get it! Get your damn dog now!" My head snapped up. Winston, my goofy, oversized lapdog, had apparently found a gap in the hedge and was now trotting happily across Officer Miller's pristine lawn, his tail wagging like a metronome. A small, muddy paw print marred the perfect green expanse. To Winston, it was a grand adventure. To Officer Miller, who was now storming out of his front door, it was clearly a declaration of war. "Winston, come!" I called, my voice calm but firm. I got to my feet, wiping the dirt from my hands onto my old jeans. Winston, ever the obedient boy, immediately turned and started trotting back towards me. But Miller was already halfway across his lawn, his face a mask of purple rage. "Are you kidding me? Uncontrolled animal, this is a violation. I have told you people about leashes." "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice even. "I've de-escalated situations with hostile foreign dignitaries. A cranky neighbor shouldn't be a problem. He must have found a hole in the hedge. It won't happen again." By now, Winston was back on my side of the property line, sitting at my feet and looking up at the shouting man with a confused tilt of his head. "It won't happen again," Miller sneered, stopping just on his side of the property line. He was a big man, broad-shouldered with a thick neck, and he was using his size to try and intimidate me. That's what everyone says. You think the rules don't apply to you? You think you can just let your mutt defecate all over my property? "He didn't do anything," I said, my patience starting to thin. I pointed to the single small paw print. "He just walked over there for a second. Again, I apologize. I'll check the entire hedge this afternoon." My calm response seemed to infuriate him even more. It was like he wanted a fight, and my refusal to engage was a personal affront. His eyes, which were already narrowed, tightened into slits. "I'm a police officer. I deal with people like you all day. People who have no respect for the law, no respect for other people's property." And that's when it happened. Winston, likely sensing my own subtle shift in mood and reacting to the overt aggression from Miller, let out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't vicious. It was a warning, a simple, canine, "Back off, buddy." For Officer Miller, that growl was all the justification he needed. In one swift, shockingly fluid motion, he reached behind his back, pulled a black handgun from a holster on his belt, and raised it. The click of the safety being disengaged was unnervingly loud in the quiet morning air. I thought he was going to point it at Winston, and a cold wave of adrenaline washed over me. But he didn't. He bypassed the dog completely. He pointed the gun directly at my chest. Time seemed to slow down, the way it does in moments of extreme crisis. My brain, honed by years of threat assessment and high-stakes analysis, went into overdrive. I registered everything. The make of the firearm, a Glock 19. The way he was holding it, a slight tremor in his hands betraying his adrenaline dump. His finger resting on the trigger, not alongside it, a terrifying breach of basic firearm safety. He was emotional, unpredictable, and holding a deadly weapon. "You need to learn some respect," he spat, his voice shaking with rage. "You and your vicious animal, you have no idea who you're messing with." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was standing there, in his sweatpants and a tight t-shirt on a Saturday morning, pointing a gun at a woman in muddy gardening clothes. He saw a nuisance neighbor, a problem to be solved with the authority he carried on his hip. He didn't see Dr. Evelyn Reed, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. He didn't see the woman who briefs the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who has a higher security clearance than almost anyone on the planet, and who, on multiple occasions, has had to make calm, rational decisions while men just like him were screaming about imminent threats. My body was frozen, my hands held slightly out to my sides in a non-threatening gesture. But my mind was racing. I wasn't thinking about pleading for my life. I wasn't thinking about my garden or my coffee. My mind was on the catastrophic, career-ending, and potentially life-altering mistake Officer Miller was making, and the fact that he was about to find out exactly who I was. My heart wasn't pounding. My breathing wasn't ragged. In fact, a strange and profound calm settled over me. It was the same icy clarity I felt in the Situation Room when a crisis was breaking overseas. Panic is a luxury you can't afford when you're in charge. Fear is an indulgence. You assess, you strategize, you act. And right now, Officer Miller was no longer just a neighbor. He was an unstable variable, a domestic threat with a deadly weapon pointed at a high-value government asset: me. "Officer Miller," I said, my voice low and steady, completely devoid of the fear he expected. I didn't plead. I didn't scream. I addressed him as if he were a junior analyst who had made a procedural error. "You are currently committing a felony, assault with a deadly weapon on a federal official, to be precise. You have approximately 10 seconds to lower your weapon and walk back to your house before you turn a career-ending mistake into a life-destroying one." He blinked, thrown by my response. He was expecting tears, begging. He had a script in his head, and I was refusing to read my lines. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. "Federal official? Lady, I've heard it all. You think that little act is gonna work? You're just some crazy dog lady in a rich neighborhood who thinks she's above the law." "That's where you're wrong," I replied, my eyes locked on his. I didn't look at the gun. You never look at the gun. You look at the person holding it. You make them see you as a human, not a target. I'm not above the law. I help write the law. The kind of law that gets men like you put in a federal prison for a very, very long time. I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, quickly masked by more bluster. "You're delusional." "Am I?" I took a small, deliberate step to my left, making sure Winston was behind me. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Reed. My security file is designated Sierra Echo Tango 7. If you run my name through any federal database, NCIC, Five Eyes, even Interpol, you will be flagged by every major intelligence agency on the planet. Your chief of police will receive a call from the Secretary of Defense's office in less than 5 minutes. Your life as you know it will be over." Every word was precise, delivered with the flat, emotionless certainty of a briefing. He was still holding the gun on me, but the conviction in his stance was starting to crumble. The tremor in his hand was more pronounced now. It wasn't rage anymore. It was fear. I am now going to reach, very slowly, into my right pocket for my phone, I stated, not asked. I narrated my every move, keeping my hands visible. I am going to make one phone call. I would advise you, for the sake of your family and your future, to have that weapon holstered and be standing on your front porch by the time that call is finished. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The purple rage had drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, blotchy mask of confusion and terror. He watched, mesmerized, as I slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I swiped the screen open and navigated to a single contact on my favorites list, a number with no name, just a string of digits I knew by heart. The phone rang once before a gravelly voice answered. Markinson. General, I said, my voice still calm, almost conversational. Winston whined softly at my feet, sensing the tension. Dr. Reed, is everything all right? Your line is unsecure. General Markinson's voice was sharp, instantly alert. No, sir. I have a situation here at my residence, a Code 7, I said, using the designation for an active threat against a protected principal. I watched Miller's face. His eyes went wide. He knew what a principal was. I have a local LEO, and Officer Miller, holding me at gunpoint on my own property. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, colder than a winter midnight. I could practically hear the gears turning, the protocols kicking into motion. Status. Markinson's voice was like flint. The situation is tense, but I am uninjured. The subject of unstable. I recommend a Tier 1 response. My location is on file. What is your ETA? Stand by, Evelyn. I heard muffled shouting in the background, a flurry of activity erupting on his end. Then he was back. ETA is 4 minutes. Do not engage further. Keep the line open. Understood, I said, and lowered the phone from my ear, but I didn't hang up. I just held it in my hand, the open line a silent testament to the storm that was about to break over this quiet suburban street. Officer Miller finally lowered the Glock. His arm dropped to his side as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. The gun hung limply from his fingers, pointed at the perfect green grass he had been so desperate to protect. His face was ashen. He was no longer a cop asserting his authority. He was a terrified man who had just lit a match in a munitions depot. He stared at me, his mouth agape, the full, crushing weight of his actions finally crashing down on him. The morning was silent again, save for the chirping of a sparrow in the oak tree above. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. There was just the space between us, charged with his dawning horror and my cold, waiting calm. And then we heard it, faintly at first, a distant wail cutting through the peaceful Saturday morning. It wasn't the familiar yelp of a local police siren or the bleat of an ambulance. This was different. It was a chorus of sirens, deep and guttural, and they were growing louder, closer, with terrifying speed. The sound was a harbinger. It wasn't just coming from one direction. It seemed to be converging on our quiet cul-de-sac from all sides, a tidal wave of authority about to crash down on Miller's manicured lawn. He flinched with every rising decibel, his head darting back and forth as if looking for an escape route that no longer existed. He had wanted to show me what real power looked like, and now he was about to get his wish. I remained still, my phone still clutched in my hand, the open line to General Markinson a silent umbilical cord to the world I inhabited from Monday to Friday. Winston, sensing the shift, pressed his body against my leg, a warm, reassuring weight in the midst of the chaos. Officer Miller looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. The blustering bully was gone, replaced by a frightened child who had kicked a hornet's nest the size of a military base. "Please," he whispered, the word barely audible over the approaching sirens. I didn't know. It was a mistake, just a misunderstanding." "Pointing a loaded weapon at an unarmed civilian is never a misunderstanding, officer," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as polished granite. "It's a choice, and choices have consequences." The first vehicle to scream around the corner wasn't a local police cruiser. It was a black, up-armored Chevrolet Suburban, the kind you see in presidential motorcades, its lights flashing silently but its siren blaring. It didn't slow down. It mounted the curb, tearing deep ruts in my neighbor's perfect lawn, the very lawn he'd just threatened my life over, and screeched to a halt, creating a solid wall between him and me. Before it had even stopped rocking, both the driver and passenger side doors flew open. Two men, dressed in tactical gear over discreet gray suits, emerged in a symphony of practiced motion. They weren't cops. Their movements were too fluid, too economical. These were federal agents. One held a carbine at a low ready, his eyes scanning everything, while the other moved towards me. "Dr. Reed, Agent Thompson, Diplomatic Security Service, are you secure?" he asked, his voice calm, but his eyes constantly moving, assessing Miller, the house, the rooftops. "I'm secure, Agent Thompson. The subject is disarmed," I said, gesturing with my head towards Miller, who now looked like he was about to collapse. He had dropped the Glock onto the grass as if it were on fire. Behind the first Suburban, two more followed, boxing Miller's property in. Then came the local police, looking utterly bewildered as they pulled up to a scene already dominated by the feds. Doors slammed, radios crackled with urgent, confused chatter. In less than a minute, my tranquil street had been transformed into a federal staging area. Neighbors were peering out their windows, their quiet Saturday morning shattered. Agent Thompson spoke quietly into his wrist mic. "Principal is secure. Subject is non-compliant but disarmed. Stand down, local PD. DSS is handling this." He then turned to Miller, his face a neutral mask that was somehow more intimidating than open anger. "Sir, put your hands on your head and get on your knees, now." Miller, moving like a man in a dream, slowly complied. The sheer shock of the situation had paralyzed him. As he knelt on the ruined grass he had cherished so much, his eyes found mine one last time. They weren't angry or defiant anymore. They were just empty, hollowed out, by the realization that his world had just ended. He had picked a fight with a random neighbor, and that neighbor had summoned the full, terrifying might of the U.S. government to their front lawn. Agents swarmed him, efficiently securing him in flex cuffs. They retrieved his sidearm from the grass using evidence collection tongs. One of them began reading him his Miranda rights in a bored monotone, the familiar words sounding surreal against the backdrop of idling engines and hushed professional voices. I saw his chief of police arrive, his face a ghastly shade of white as he took in the scene, the federal vehicles, the tactical agents, and one of his own officers on his knees in handcuffs. The chief looked at me, then at the agents, and I could see the frantic calculations running through his mind. He started walking towards me, his expression a mixture of panic and apology. But Agent Thompson stepped smoothly in his way. "Sir, you'll need to stand back. This is a federal crime scene now." The chief froze, looking utterly powerless in his own jurisdiction. My attention, however, was drawn to a black sedan that had just pulled up, parking silently behind the chaos. It was unremarkable, the kind of car that blends into any DC motorcade, but I knew who it belonged to. The back door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved from oak. General Markinson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He hadn't sent a team, he'd come himself. He strode past the local cops and the DSS agents as if they were statues, his eyes fixed on me. He ignored the cuffed and trembling Officer Miller completely. He stopped in front of me, his gaze sweeping over me quickly, checking for injury. "Evelyn," he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the noise. "Report." "Uninjured, General. Subject is in custody. Threat neutralized."
I said, the formal language a comforting return to normalcy. He gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. Good, we'll handle the cleanup. He looked around at the circus that had descended upon my lawn, a flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even dark amusement, in his eyes. Then his gaze fell upon Winston, who was now sniffing curiously at the general's polished shoes. Markinson's severe expression softened almost imperceptibly. He reached down and scratched Winston behind the ears. "And who's this brave soldier?" "That's Winston, sir. He started the diplomatic incident." The general allowed a rare, thin smile to cross his lips. "Good boy," he murmured to the dog, before straightening up. His face was all business again. He looked past me, his eyes landing on Officer Miller being led to one of the Suburbans. "This is an unacceptable breach. It won't happen again." It felt like it was over. The threat was gone, the cavalry had arrived, and the paperwork was about to begin. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But as they were placing Miller into the back of the Suburban, he suddenly twisted, his face contorted with a final desperate surge of madness and defiance. You think you've won?" he screamed at me, his voice cracking. "You have no idea what you've just done. Check the house. Just check the damn house."
Miller's frantic, desperate scream hung in the air, a discordant note in the otherwise controlled symphony of federal procedure. "Check the house!" It wasn't the plea of a man trying to bargain. It was the wild, triumphant cry of someone revealing a final hidden card. My blood ran cold. General Markinson's head snapped towards the unassuming suburban home, his relaxed posture instantly vanishing, replaced by the rigid alertness of a commander sensing an ambush. "Thompson," Markinson barked, "what do we know about the subject's residence?" Agent Thompson was already on it, speaking urgently into his wrist mic. "Stand by. Sir, Miller is single, no known family at this address. No red flags on any watch list. He's a 10-year veteran of the force, clean record until today." "That's not what I asked," Markinson said, his voice dangerously low. "Get me a tactical team. I want that house cleared, now." The agents who had been securing Miller now moved with renewed, deadly purpose. They formed a stack at Miller's front door, weapons raised. Another agent produced a battering ram. The quiet cul-de-sac was about to witness a full-blown breach. But before they could smash the door in, I held up a hand. "Wait," I said, my mind racing, piecing together fragments of observation I had previously dismissed. The obsessive neatness, the chemical smell from his lawn, the way he talked about rules and respect with a fervor that bordered on zealotry, the explosive, disproportionate rage over a muddy paw print. This wasn't just a man with an anger problem. This was something else. Something darker. "General," I said, turning to Markinson, "he's not a terrorist. He's not a foreign operative. I don't think he has hostages." My eyes met his. "I think he's a collector." Markinson raised an eyebrow, a silent command for me to explain. I walked past the line of armed agents and approached Miller's front door. I pointed to the small, almost invisible camera lens embedded in the doorbell. High-res, wide-angle, with night vision, military grade. I then pointed to the window frames. Pressure sensors, the kind we use to secure sensitive facilities, not a residential home. Finally, I pointed at a small vent near the foundation. That's not for an HVAC unit. It's an air scrubber. He's controlling the climate in there to a precise degree. My words painted a picture that had nothing to do with national security in the traditional sense, but was disturbing in its own right. Markinson understood immediately. He gave a curt nod to Agent Thompson, who holstered the battering ram. Another agent approached with a sophisticated lock-picking kit, and, within seconds, the front door clicked open. They entered not with a flashbang, but with a quiet, methodical sweep. The scene that unfolded was worse than I could have imagined. The inside of Officer Miller's house was not a home. It was a museum. But not a museum of art or history. It was a meticulously curated collection of stolen goods. Not just any goods.
These were items taken from police evidence lockups. Display cases lined the walls, each one artfully lit. In one, there was a collection of jewelry from a high-profile robbery a decade ago, pieces that were never recovered. In another, neatly arranged stacks of cash, bundled with evidence tape from a major drug bust. A rack on the wall held firearms, each with a small, neatly typed card detailing the crime it was used in. Homicides, armed robberies, assaults. He hadn't sold them or fenced them. He had kept them. He had built a secret shrine to the very criminality he was supposed to be fighting. His obsessive control over his lawn was a reflection of the secret, ordered world of chaos he curated inside his home. He wasn't a dirty cop in the traditional sense of taking bribes. He was a kleptomaniac, driven by a pathological need to possess and control these artifacts of lawlessness. His frantic scream wasn't a threat. It was a boast. He was cornered, his life in ruins, and his last act of defiance was to reveal his masterpiece. He wanted us to see his collection, to marvel at his audacity. He had just pointed a gun at one of the most powerful women in the country, and in doing so, he had ensured that his life's secret work would finally be discovered by an audience worthy of its scope. As the federal and local authorities began the painstaking task of cataloging Miller's private museum of crime, General Markinson walked back over to me. He stood for a moment, looking from the House of Horrors back to my peaceful, slightly overgrown garden. "You know, Evelyn," he said, his voice back to its usual gruff tone, "we spend billions on intelligence to predict threats from rogue states and terror cells. And sometimes the biggest threat is a man who loves his lawn too much." I managed a small smile. "It's always the variables you don't account for, General." He nodded, then looked down at Winston, who was now sitting patiently by my side. "Your dog showed excellent judgment, better than some of my colonels." He gave me a final, appraising look. "I'll have a permanent DSS detail assigned to your residence by evening. This won't happen again." "Thank you, General, but that's not necessary," I said, shaking my head. "This wasn't an attack on my position. It was a case of a very unstable man having a very bad day. A security detail would only change this," I gestured to my quiet street, my garden, "into another fortress. I have enough of those in my life." Markinson considered this for a moment, then gave a rare conceding nod. He understood. My home was my sanctuary, the one place I wasn't Deputy Undersecretary of Defense. It was where I was just Evelyn, the lady with the goofy golden retriever and the slightly unruly tomato plants. And I wasn't going to let a man like Officer Miller take that away from me. As the last of the official vehicles pulled away and a stunned silence fell back over the neighborhood, I knelt down and pulled a stubborn weed from my flower bed. The rich, dark soil felt cool and real in my hand. Winston nudged my arm with his wet nose, and I looked up at the perfect blue Saturday sky. My sanctuary was safe.